Imagine you're sitting on a plane. A man next to you pulls out a cigarette, lights up, and casually puffs smoke right into the aisle. No one bats an eye. Not the flight attendant, not the pilot, not the guy holding a baby across the row. This was normal. Meanwhile, across town, a dad is loading up the kids into a car, half a whiskey still swirling in his glass, ready to hit the road. And yes, there are no seatbelts. Welcome to the 1950s, an era that might look squeaky clean in black and white photos, but scratch the surface and you'll find a very different story. A time when things we consider wildly illegal today were just another Tuesday back then. In this video, we're counting down 25 things that were totally normal in the 1950s, but would absolutely get you fined, fired, or arrested today. From everyday school discipline to casual drug use, from switchblades to shady radio stations, this list is going to blow your mind. And some of these aren't just outdated, they're straight up shocking. Stick around because toward the end of this video, we'll get into some of the wildest things that were legal back then, including stuff that's banned worldwide today. His is not nostalgia. This is the strange, raw, sometimes jaw-dropping reality of mid-century America. Ready to take a trip back in time? Let's go. Let's start with one of the most jarring images for anyone born after the 80s, smoking on airplanes. Yes, it wasn't just allowed, it was expected. Planes had ashtrays built into every seat. Passengers lit up Marlboros at 30,000 feet, filling that tiny metal tube with secondhand smoke. It wasn't until 1990 that smoking was completely banned on U.S. domestic flights. Before that, you just had to survive the fog. And it wasn't just planes. Let's talk about drinking and driving. Not just a legal gray area, but something totally normal. In the 1950s, there were no nationwide laws setting legal blood alcohol content. Some states didn't even have specific DUI laws on the books. Having a few beers before driving home from the bar wasn't just common, it was culturally accepted. Cops might have even let you slide if you were just buzzed. Today, you'd be cuffed, booked, and possibly jailed. Now picture this. It's Saturday, and Dad's in the backyard burning garbage. That's right. People used to light their trash on fire in metal barrels or pits. Paper, food, plastic. It all went up in flames. It filled neighborhoods with smoke and nasty fumes. This wasn't some backwoods thing either. It was completely normal suburban life. By the 1970s, cities started cracking down due to pollution, but in the 50s, it was as routine as mowing the lawn. But wait, it gets darker. Corporal punishment in schools. Imagine being smacked with a wooden paddle for talking during class. In the 1950s, teachers had free rein to physically punish students, slapping, paddling, even strapping hands with belts. Parents not only knew about it, they supported it. Spare the rod, spoil the child wasn't just a saying, it was policy. Today, that'd be a lawsuit waiting to happen. In most U.S. states, any form of physical punishment in schools is illegal, and in some cases, it's considered abuse. And finally, let's talk about kids at work. We're not talking about summer jobs, we're talking full-on child labor. In the 1950s, it was still common to see kids working in factories, farms, and family businesses. Sure, some labor laws existed, but they weren't strictly enforced, and many industries found loopholes. Children as young as 10 or 12 were expected to contribute to the family income. Today, that's a violation of federal law. The Fair Labor Standards Act protects minors from dangerous or excessive work. But back then, it was considered character building. That's just the tip of the iceberg. The 1950s looked clean-cut on the outside, but when it came to public safety and personal conduct, the rules were practically non-existent compared to today. And you won't believe what they were putting in their medicine cabinets back then. Imagine walking into your local pharmacy and buying a bottle of speed. No prescription, no ID, no questions asked. In the 1950s, this was totally normal. People in that era were popping amphetamines like candy. Brand names like Benzedrine and Dexedrine were marketed as diet pills, energy boosters, and mood enhancers. Doctors prescribed them for everything from weight loss to depression. Housewives took them to stay skinny and upbeat. Truckers used them to drive cross-country without sleeping. College kids, same deal. Study fuel. And if you needed to calm down after all that stimulation, don't worry. The answer was barbiturates, downers that slowed your system and helped you sleep. They were known by names like Seconal and Nembutal, and they were sold over the counter in many places before tighter regulations came in the 1960s. This dangerous cocktail of uppers and downers was rampant, and it wasn't seen as a problem. In fact, it was part of the ideal 1950s lifestyle. Buzzed, productive, and quietly dependent on pharmaceuticals. And it didn't stop there. Before modern drug laws kicked in, substances that are felony-level illegal today were either totally legal or barely regulated. For example, heroin, yes, actual heroin, was still legally available until 1924, but its presence lingered into the 1950s through black market channels with minimal crackdown. Cannabis, which is now legal in some states but tightly regulated federally, was viewed more as a nuisance than a serious crime. It was still being casually used in jazz clubs and among youth subcultures, though attitudes were beginning to shift. Even opium and cocaine-based tonics had only recently been taken off store shelves. Coca-Cola had just removed actual cocaine from its formula a few decades earlier. The idea of tightly controlled prescriptions, federal drug schedules, and war on drugs policies, that didn't exist yet. The 50s were still floating in a haze of over-the-counter narcotics and home remedies that would now be 100% illegal and insanely dangerous. And speaking of dangerous, wait until you hear what they were doing in the world of advertising. Picture this. A TV commercial showing a doctor confidently lighting a cigarette and recommending a brand. More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. That was a real ad in the 1950s. This was the Wild West of advertising, when companies could say pretty much whatever they wanted. No disclaimers, no scientific proof. Just catchy jingles and bold claims. Need to lose weight? Swallow some tapeworm pills. Trouble sleeping? Take barbiturates. Worried about your baby's teething pain? Give them alcohol-laced syrup. All of this was advertised in magazines, radio, and TV, with no warning labels, no ingredient transparency, and absolutely no shame. Regulatory bodies like the FDA and FTC existed, but enforcement was weak, and companies found plenty of ways to slide dangerous products under the radar. Cigarettes, narcotics, and toxic household cleaners were all sold with happy slogans and smiling models. But if you think it was only about products, wait until you hear what was happening in music. Let's talk about Payola, a fancy name for bribery in broadcasting. In the 1950s, record labels would secretly pay radio DJs to play certain songs, not because they were popular, but to make them popular. This is how some artists skyrocketed to fame, while others never stood a chance. These under-the-table payments fueled the rise of early rock and roll, but also corrupted the industry. DJs had the power to control what America listened to, and they were cashing in on it. At the time, there was no law stopping it. It wasn't until the late 1950s and early 60s that Payola became a scandal, leading to congressional hearings and eventual criminal penalties. But by then, the damage had been done. So in the 1950s, ads could lie. DJs could be bought, and nobody really cared until someone got caught. But what about weapons? The stuff people could just buy and carry without question? Let's go there next. Imagine a 15-year-old walking into a corner store, slapping down a few bucks, and walking out with a switchblade knife. No ID, no background check. Totally legal. In the 1950s, switchblades weren't just legal, they were everywhere. Popularized by Hollywood movies and youth gangs, these spring-loaded blades were sold in gas stations, army surplus stores, and even in catalogs. They became a kind of fashion accessory for rebellious teens, especially among the so-called juvenile delinquent crowd. Movies like Rebel Without a Cause and West Side Story helped romanticize the image of the tough kid with a switchblade, and the public started to panic. By the late 50s, rising fears of gang violence pushed Congress to act. The Federal Switchblade Act of 1958 made it illegal to manufacture or import switchblades across state lines, essentially banning them from everyday use. But back in the early 50s, owning a deadly concealed weapon was just another part of growing up in some neighborhoods. It didn't raise eyebrows. It just made you look cool. And it wasn't just knives. People could also buy and carry other dangerous tools that are strictly regulated today. Mace, brass knuckles, even certain types of firearms with minimal oversight. The concept of weapons control was practically non-existent. Today, getting caught with a switchblade in many states could mean jail time. In the 1950s, it meant street cred. Up next, radio stations that broke all the rules and dared the government to stop them. Ever tune into a radio station that's not supposed to exist? In the 1950s, pirate radio was the rebellious heartbeat of the airwaves. These were unlicensed, illegal radio stations operating out of basements, barns, and even offshore ships. They played whatever mainstream stations wouldn't touch: underground rock, taboo political content, and sometimes even messages meant to rile up the government. Why? Because the airwaves were heavily controlled by big broadcasters and government regulators. The Federal Communications Commission, FCC, had strict rules about who could operate a station and what they could play. But pirate stations? They didn't care. They crashed the airwaves, broadcasting at unauthorized frequencies, often at night, and built cult followings. Some became legends in their communities. Others were shut down in dramatic raids. And back then, the punishments weren't all that severe. You might get a warning, a small fine, maybe lose your gear. Compared to today's strict FCC penalties and federal charges, it was a slap on the wrist. Some pirates were activists, others just wanted to play rock and roll their way. Either way, it was a bold act of defiance that would be 100% illegal today. Today, even a short-range FM broadcast without a license can get you fined thousands of dollars. In the 50s, you could become a local legend with a mic and a dream. But the laws really start getting weird when you look at what passed for entertainment back then. Let's talk about media content and obscenity. Imagine you're flipping through your dad's old film reels from the 1950s and, surprise, there's a topless model posing in soft lighting, playing coy with the camera. No plot, no dialogue, just skin. In the 1950s, these were called glamour films or stag films, and they were surprisingly common and legal. Sold under the table at camera shops, gas stations, or through coded ads in the back of men's magazines, these 8mm reels featured women in lingerie or topless, dancing or posing. It wasn't considered porn the way we think of it today. It was more like sleaze you could get away with. There were no strict federal obscenity laws enforcing a clear boundary, and most enforcement came down to local police who usually looked the other way. And it didn't stop at home movies. The 1950s were a time when standards for obscenity in media and art were vague and inconsistent. You could buy explicit pulp novels with covers showing women in bondage or violent scenes. Magazines like True Detective and Nightmare were stacked on newsstands nationwide. Even in film, there was a slow unraveling of the production code, with movies pushing the limits on what could be shown in terms of sexuality, violence, and moral ambiguity. Artists, meanwhile, tested limits with provocative pieces that wouldn't raise eyebrows today, but in that era had just enough shock factor to stir whispers, but not enough to trigger bans. It wasn't until the late 50s and early 60s that crackdowns began, especially with the rise of federal obscenity laws and high-profile Supreme Court cases that started drawing lines between art and obscenity. But back in the 50s, the line was blurred and often ignored. If you had a camera, a model, and a quiet basement, you had a business. And yet, while that was playing on the reel in one room, in the garage, people were blowing stuff up. Let's get into the final chunk, the crazy stuff you could do for fun that would get you arrested today. Imagine this. It's the 4th of July. Dad hands the kids a box of M80 firecrackers, industrial-grade mini-explosives, and tells them to go have fun in the backyard. No supervision, no permits, no worries. In the 1950s, fireworks were the Wild West. Kids set them off in neighborhoods, and adults casually lit Roman candles in their hands. It wasn't until the late 20th century that major cities began cracking down after too many fingers and houses went missing. And speaking of safety, or the lack of it, seatbelts weren't even standard. Most cars didn't come with them, and if they did, nobody used them. Babies rode up front in mom's lap, and older kids bounced around in the back, or even in the open bed of a pickup truck. Totally legal, totally dangerous. How about pets? Ever seen someone walk a monkey on a leash? You might have in the 50s. People regularly kept exotic and wild animals as pets. Snakes, monkeys, raccoons, even big cats. There were no federal bans, no permits, and no real concern until the exotic pet trade spun out of control decades later. People also built onto their homes with no permits, no inspections, and no codes. Want a second story? Grab a hammer. Electrical wiring? Figure it out yourself. Today, you'd get hit with massive fines or even have your home condemned. Other things that were just life back then. Littering. People tossed trash out car windows like it was nothing. Sprayed toxic lawn chemicals without warning signs. Smoked around kids, pregnant women, and in enclosed public spaces like elevators. And let's not forget the legal discrimination baked into everyday life. Gender-based hiring policies, marital consent laws, and denying women the right to open a bank account without a man's approval. All of this? Legal in the 1950s. Looking back, it's shocking just how many normal things from the 1950s are now not just frowned upon, but illegal. And now, let's bring it all home. From burning trash in your backyard to popping pills from the drugstore without a prescription, the 1950s were a different planet when it came to laws and public safety. What we see today as reckless, dangerous, or flat-out criminal was once just part of daily life. People didn't question it, they embraced it. The cigarette in the cockpit, the kid working the night shift, the firecracker in the toddler's hand, it was all normal. But society changes. We learn, we adapt. And sometimes we look back and think, what the hell were we doing? That's the fascinating and sometimes terrifying truth about history. The laws we take for granted today were born out of mistakes, accidents, and cultural wake-up calls. And who knows? Maybe in 50 years, our kids will say the same about us. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the past, subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss what's coming next.